Good morning, everyone. We are doing part 3 of this essay, and I will be reading it to the end today. Okay, so um, I've just been discovering a bunch of new tricks that I can perform with social networking, including when I'm reading on my iPhone, it automatically publishes to my Instagram, which I have now activated um, so that it also does that. And I'm not sure if it publishes on Facebook. It might. I haven't had a chance to check. It's pretty intense what social networking is doing to us. Let me just check here. I want to get my YouTube up so I can see the chat. And well, hello and good morning, Art. um, let's see. Sorry, my screen has gotten the better of me. They keep upgrading things, and because make things better, they make them worse for us old codgers. But anyway, I'm here. Hi, Sherry. Nice to see Sherry. Nice to see you. Um, oh my God. Okay. So last week, I guess I read this um, paragraph about the essential difference between psyche and the soul, but it probably came at the end of last week's video. And so what I want to do is read it first to continue. And so I am reading an essay from this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst, Volume 4. And this essay, which is a very long one, but it's very good, it's by Heike Weiss Heider. It's entitled The Burning Urgency of Psychodynamic Discoveries in the Red Book for Psychiatry and Psychotherapy, a key for healing resonance of soul, love, and life. That's the essay that I'm reading from. And this is our third attempt at this essay. We're well into it at this point, but it has a lot of subtitles. So the subtitle that we will be starting with today is Essential Difference Between Psyche and Soul. But let me just look at what uh, Cherie says. Manufacturing consent is not manufacturing intellect, uh, according to Noam Chomsky. Yep, that's for sure. And uh, our politicians have gotten into this well and truly. And so we think a lot of people think that we consented to an attack on Venezuela, and uh, we didn't consent to it in any sense of the word, I think. Um, and But anyway, good morning, Richard. Nice to see you. You're still reeling in grief from the Minneapolis killing of that poor woman. Absolutely. That was just totally uncalled for and ridiculous. And um, we have to get this bunch of hooligans under control, that's for sure. All right. Here's the subtitle: The Essential Difference Between Psyche and Soul. The theme of the opposites rises more distinctively after the maiden emerges from the psyche as soul, as if the level of consciousness widens and deepens through this distinction. Further, the realm of feeling intensifies after the figure soul appears. Soul is a universal concept found in religions and philosophies all over the world. Jung, Jung excuse me. Jung introduces the term in psychology. Even today, this is seen by many as controversial. As a psychiatrist and analytical psychologist, I experience the concept of I experience the concept of soul in my work and life as therapeutically meaningful and pragmatically helpful. In Liber Primus, Jung has the revelation that the psyche can be seen as the totality of all psychological processes. That's the psyche. I'm going to just change my aspect here a little bit. The soul seems of a particular quality and vitality. She appears with numinous intensity and with regard to the ego as a function with greater capacity for connection and relationship. The soul arouses deep emotions and can evolve toward differentiated feeling and self-reflecting levels of consciousness, essential for healing processes, because only thus is individuality able to rise. Jung realizes the incontestable truth that relating with and becoming a caring servant of the soul by supporting and translating expressions of suffering experienced by patients exponentially enhances the transforming and healing dynamics. The soul seems a dimension for relatedness and a phenomenon of animation unfolding in the dynamic of love as an essence within the psyche. This knowledge is significant and vital in therapeutic processes. Experience reveals that a regressive depressive phase prognostically ends with the soul when the soul emerges with a renewal of animated energy. Difficult themes and negative contents can be confronted and transformed because new energy levels emerge not out of the self and through caring therapeutic relationships, which open possibilities to evolve out of suffering. Okay, I'm going to read that sentence again because I don't think I read it properly. Difficult themes and negative contents can be confronted and transformed because new energy levels emerge out of the self and through caring therapeutic relationships, which open possibilities to evolve out of suffering. Strengthening an individual through animation from within has an impact on dosages of medication, which can be applied with greater discrimination. Deeply wounded individuals may only be able to open up to therapy as well as to their inner and outer life and others on both levels as well after gaining confidence and trust by encountering such figures in their own psyches. These examples provide ample evidence for the value of such encounters and processes therapeutically. Therefore, it is obvious that recognition of and engagement with dynamics of the soul should be initiated and honored in psychiatry. Now, I want to think about, and I hope all of you will think about the soul of the collective unconscious. And by the collective unconscious, I mean the collective unconscious of us as an individual, vis-a-vis the family, vis-a-vis our organizations and workplaces, vis-a-vis our towns, villages, counties, states, nation states, and the world at large. And the reason I'm asking you to do this is because the Jung's material, as it applies to individuals, is now fairly straightforward. We have a lot of writing about Jung's materials. There are a lot of people making websites about Carl Jung and what he did 100 years ago. And he was asked in 1956, what is the most important thing that you discovered in your psychological development or in your work? And he said, that's the collective unconscious. And yet we almost never talk about the collective unconscious. Jungian analysts talk about only individual unconscious, and nobody else really understands the material. And I never understood why, if Jung knew all this material, why he wasn't more vociferous during, especially during World War II, after he had developed out most of his material. At least he knew what it was, whether or not he had completed all his collected works, which today we have in toto, and they are a body of work. As he was going along, they weren't available in toto, and so he was still developing, and society was still developing. But it's incumbent upon us, uh, you and me, as we talk about these things, to talk about how these things also apply to our collective unconscious as individuals. And it seems to me that when we have a pain, like the murder of this woman in Minneapolis this week and the shooting of two other individuals in Portland, those are indicating our psychology, and they are causing us to see how we can apply what we think is right to our collective. And we've had the manifestation of the devil, of evil, in our society for a decade now, and it hasn't gone well. And it is time for all of us to step back, reconsider, and decide what kind of a world we want to live in, who we are as a people, and who we expect others to be as peoples. And it seems to me that because Jung couldn't do it in his time, because he was living it, understand, he was living it and writing about it, and mainly applying it to individuals because he was a doctor of individuals, as we all know. Um, it it probably was beyond his ken to also apply it to the collective unconscious, although he was well aware of the collective unconscious because of his prefiguration dreams in World War II. But last week, um, uh, we had one of our members um, give us a dream, a prefiguration dream about the attack on Venezuela. And so these things are very much still in the unconscious. Um, and they're still available to us if we pay attention to them. And that means that we have to pay attention to our inner life and what we understand about our inner life. And So let me see what you folks are saying. Uh, so Cherie says, my friend's son who went to Boston College is not a bar, not at Bard. He is at Broad Museum in Los Angeles. Her sister made a mistake. And Cherie says, horrible what happened in Minneapolis. I agree. Same with George Floyd. Richard, there must be thousands of Jung channels by now, and each one gives its stance on the good doctor, much like the thousands of Christian channels and churches that argue their points against the other. And Kundalini, yes, I agree with you, Richard. And so it's the combination of all of them and all of us speaking to one another that is going to come to a collective reality about what it all means. Um, Kundalini King says, reading Depth Psychology and a New Ethic by Eric Neumann. That's a powerful book. Cherie, 100 years of Zionism and 500 or 600 years of Western dominance. Yep. But there is only one truth, or that truth could not be true. And Kundalini says, I've also read Robert L. Moore's Facing the Dragon. Both books are about psychology and evil, and you better add to your reading list James Hillman's book, A Terrible Love of War, because what Hillman points out to us is that war is archetypal. It's something that we are not going to escape. Or if we do escape it, it's going to be a very, very long time because we literally have wars in everything we do in life. As um, last night, I was criticized by my wife because uh, in my privacy, after she had was going to bed and my mother-in-law had gone to bed, I was starting to watch a movie about World War II. And my purpose in watching those movies, and obviously I've watched a lot of them in my many years, is to try to understand what was going on psychologically that caused those events, and how did the greatest generation uh, pull us out of those events. And unfortunately, we've slipped back in another way now with the MAGA movement. And I think the MAGA movement may be dissolving. I think we start to see it dissolving um, because the fearless leader of the MAGA movement, um, in his great bone spurred courage, wants to prove himself as a man when he never proved himself as a man when it was time for him to do so in his youth. And anyway, anyway, Hillman's book, A Terrible Love of War, is indeed a very good book and it's worth ordering. Uh, and Kundalini says, I greatly value the insight of any elders in Jungian psychology. The event in Minnesota was a real tipping point. Yeah, and obviously it's got a lot of people angry, which is emotion. And when emotion moves us, we change. We do make changes. And so when uh, one thing that happens is in wars, emotion changes us over time. And we saw the consequences of our activity or inactivity in World War I and World War II. In the Korean War, we see all these, um, quote, good wars and bad wars. that have come along, and we're learning something about ourselves as human beings and the human species as a whole. It's very expensive. It costs blood, a lot of blood. And that is was one of my first insights about the Red Book, in that there is a lot of blood in the Red Book, and Jung says that it's blood that's necessary in order for human beings to learn. Um, and unfortunately, the elders in Jungian psychology, most of them are Jungian analysts. I am not. I'm not a Uh, I'm not a mental health professional. And so mental health professionals have to mind their P's and Q's. They can't get too political, or they're going to rule out about 50% of their potential clientele. So they have, for the most part, stayed neutral in political issues. And so very few um, mental health professionals have spoken out. There have been a few. Um, and Bandy Lee is an example of that. Um, and the book that was written by a number of analysts at the time of Jung's first election, which was trying to diagnose him. Unfortunately, they're trying to diagnose him as an individual, and we need to diagnose our whole society. And we need to prescribe some actions that can change things. And I don't think we're even capable of that as yet. And so we have to play blind man's bluff and find the things that work correctly. We know that the Vietnam War was a terrible waste. Uh, I played my part in that, and we lost 58,000 of my brothers and sisters there. All their blood was sacrificed to learn that lesson, that a small country that's defending its own territory is going to be more powerful than a global power like the United States. Um, so Sheree says, my New Year's promise to myself is getting off social media, and the music I choose will be my choice. Uh, it's easier said than done, Sheree. We have rules in my school about no cell phones, and yet the kids find ways to use their cell phones even in class. Um, and let's see. And Sheree says, except that those who get what is going on, whether it is the independent journalist I choose, not just opinion makers, even some military analysts. I have my choices. Yeah, we all have to make our choices. And so, a lot of people think they want to be or are MAGAs. And so uh, all they do is watch, um, a megaphone in the form of Fox News. And the same can be true of MS Now, where it's all politics all the time, and on the opposite side of the spectrum. And, that's the way it is, but we're all pushing this medicine ball around the playing field, and eventually, and we've all been at odds with one another, okay, for forever, okay, since the Reformation, certainly. There have been more and more Protestant denominations that have developed, and they all think they have God's gift to wisdom, and they don't. Not each one of them. They all have a piece of it, and they have to accept the views of others. And so, as I've often said, instead of looking at each other like this, where we're not paying attention to one another, we have to change it and start paying attention to one another and trying to understand what it is about us as humans that can create a better world, a more loving world. Um, and so Waikiki Kea says it's not actual politics, it's social engineering. Um, and yeah, we have to find a way to to um, I'm sorry, I'm being distracted because uh, some colleagues have just come into the room to remove a bed that's in this room, and it's a bit distracting. But anyway, they are trying to socially engineer us. And so each one of us has to try to come to our own conclusions, reach our own individuation first, and then work toward a society that individuates in an appropriate way so that we're not overly dominating any one individual or any one individual group, which is the tendency, of course, as we've seen through history. Um, thank you, Richard. Richard says, I've sampled quite a few of Jung channels, and Skips is the only one that's in touch with current reality. Thank you, Richard. And so, there's a distinction. We have to understand who people are. All Jungian analysts are um, psychologists, probably. They may be licensed psychologists. They have to walk a certain path in order to have clients. Um, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a psychiatrist, and I can't prescribe any medicine for you. What I can prescribe is common sense and thinking about it for yourself. And if you think about it for yourself, you'll understand a few things. For example, right now in our current affairs, we have a president who last week talked about attacking uh, between 5 and 7 countries. I lost count after a while. Uh, and it, we have to understand a tactic of the U.S. military, which is ever since World War II, we've been planning for and equipping for two wars going on globally. Probably one in Europe or in Central Europe, and one in Asia. And so we built a armed forces that's capable of doing two wars. But if we're going to create a series of wars in Latin America, and then create a war with Iran, uh, then we're going to have our hands full, and it's not going to be very pretty. And we better really think about it. I mean, the Iranians have had a bad deal because they have a theocratic government that's been very autocratic, and they won't let anybody think big thoughts. If you think and speak, you're in trouble in Iran. You might get beheaded um, or stoned. And so, those tactics work to a certain extent. But, oh, by the way, there are lots of Catholics in the UK now. Most Protestant denominations use the King James Bible for their Bible. Well, the King James Bible came along at the time of James the First, who was Catholic. He was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was beheaded by Elizabeth the First, and um, and so uh, there are plenty of Protestant denominations that are using this Bible that was created by a Catholic, and so anyway, who knows? In the end, we're going to have to all look at the same words and come to a conclusion. I just got a tremendous book that's got all these pull-out pages with, for example, it's got in one three-panel pull-out page, both sides, it's got the lineage of Jesus Christ going back to Adam. Wow, I think that's great that those guys went through and worked out that entire lineage. That's pretty incredible. Um, and but you can think of that as a kind of distraction because you know, if you spend your time trying to think about something as complicated as this three-page line of lineage going back to Adam, um, and you don't think about what's really going on in the world, then you've consumed a lot of brain power, and you better start thinking about it. Because, oh, by the way, um, in one sense, the current religions of the world sell magic. Okay, they sell an idea, and then they build on that idea and build on that idea and build on that idea to the point that new people coming along, children, they have no chance because their parents are teaching them something that's based on ideas that were developed by early Iron Age men, and we have to step back from that and say, okay, what do we know from these things and know and what not? And I can assure you that there's almost no Christian that knows that lineage of Christ back to Jesus Christ. I've never even seen it before this morning. When as I say, I bought this book, and here's these people spending their time. They obviously were scholars who went all the way through the Bible and got this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy's wife and so on. It was an incredible task to come up with that, but all it is distraction. It's distraction because uh, who cares who uh, Jesus Christ's 15th great grandfather was. That doesn't really tell us a hell of a lot. Um, and so So Richard says there are 30 some thousand Christian denominations, yet there is only one Catholic Church. And Richard, your information is not correct because there are Orthodox Catholic churches. There's five churches that were developed in the East. There's the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, and so on. I think there's even Egyptian Orthodox. So, um, so anyway, yeah, not, I'm not I'm not trying to point out your failure here. Obviously, you're correct. And the Catholic Church, in the sense that the Catholic Church has piled symbol upon symbol upon symbol, and most people, it's not within most people's ken to dig themselves out of that. Um, and what all of us have to do is just step back and say, what is it that these people are saying to us? What is it that was being said to us in the Bible? And I don't deny anything in the Bible. I agree with everything as a fact. Um, and the question is, what is the meaning? Okay, and so um, this morning, for example, I was reading um, that 500 people saw Jesus Christ after his crucifixion, and I don't doubt that. But what we have to realize is that almost all the big events of the Bible, I'm not saying every one, but many of them came out of dreams and visions. So what does that mean? Okay, if we take the Virgin Mary, we look at it at a time when 13-year-old girls, which is what I think Mary was, um, didn't really know where babies come from, and so didn't necessarily know how she got pregnant. And um, and she lived in a country or an area of the world where women still are stoned for adultery and for having babies out of wedlock. And so she had a dream, which Joseph chose to accept and believe rather than leave um, his fiance to the tender mercies of his society at the time. And and so we've been building on that dream and on Joseph's later dream um, for 2,000 years now. And so I absolutely believe that they had those dreams. There's no doubt about it. And the question is, um, what in the physical world does it mean, and what in the psychological world does it mean? And obviously, in the psychological world, um, those dreams are important, and they're trying to tell human beings a different way to treat one another, obviously. And that's certainly respected by Joseph and certainly respected by everyone in Jesus's time. Um, but that doesn't mean that that God works in that way. As Jung later acknowledged in his letter to David Cox, which you can read on this YouTube channel, um, Jung sees God as the collective unconscious and a personal God as your unconscious. And that is part of our national psyche, part of our individual psyche. And so, what needs to happen is that we need to start thinking about the collective psyche. What is the soul of the country that's emerging? It's very painful. It involves a lot of blood, unfortunately, um, and has done through the 20th century. And so, but we need to step back from the wooey woo magic stuff and just acknowledge that the collective unconscious does in fact exist. And then if it exists and that collective unconscious is actually a manifestation of God, then what's going on and how do we change it? That's the question. That's a real question, it seems to me. Uh, Hi, Art. Nice to see you. Um, so Richard is saying the lineages in old Bibles. It's got to do with the Judaic prophecy. I don't deny that. But even if you take that 3 or 6 page timeline going back to Jesus, to Adam, human beings have existed a lot longer than that, a lot longer. Um, and um, and so what was going on before that? And I think we have to acknowledge that there there probably is collective and unconscious within elephants, within whales, within seagoing mammals of all kinds. Um, and and what does that mean? I mean, that's important. Uh, take a drink. And Cherie says the Catholic Church always has been bureaucratic flux of different bureaucratic theologies. Absolutely. So Richard says the Orthodox call it divine liturgy, Catholics call it Mass, and the same ritual. And it's honestly, Richard, it's not much different from um, Protestant ritual. I mean, the Mass is essentially, taking communion, same as we do in the Protestant church. And so, Richard, the Catholic Orthodox in the East is much, much closer to the original apostolic tradition. The point is, Richard, that things do change, have changed. What is the meaning of that change? You know, Franklin Roosevelt said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. The one thing that's certain about the future is the change will be there. And so, but the question is, do we change for the better or do we not? And Cherie says, Skip, did you know that Krishnamurti received a Peace Award at the United Nations in 1986? I think I did know that at some point. I thank you for recalling it to my memory. I was not aware of it uh, in my conscious mind, but in my deep unconscious, I do think I was aware of it at some point. We in the West have a watered down version of Christology, and I believe that God planned it that way on purpose. Well, that seems to be true, Richard. Yeah, I'm sorry for my throat. All right. Um, I guess I've thrown a monkey wrench in this society we've developed sufficiently so that we can go on. Okay, next subtitle, The Loss. In the beginning of an encounter with a patient, often there is a feeling of loss, however varied its appearance in the patient's life might be. When something essential is missing in a personal life, whether it is someone else or a purposeful path, frequently a sense of emptiness and meaninglessness can take over. This impression lead uh, these impressions lead to loss of development of instinct, social connections, decreased body consciousness, and an absence of dreams and visions. Most people try to find all sorts of distractions as long as possible, saying that the spirit of the times, in a protracted and often pathological extroversion. I'm sorry. Most people try to find all sorts of distractions as long as possible, staying with the spirit of the times in a protracted and often pathological extroversion. They do everything they can to avoid the soul. This tendency seems very pronounced in our time. Most will be unable to bear this torment, but will throw themselves with greed back at man, things, and thoughts, whose slaves they will become from then on. And, obviously, this can apply to societies as well. Um, and I think if we read this again from the societal point of view, in the beginning of an encounter with a patient, the patient being the society, often there is a feeling of loss. Well, certainly many of us in this country, at least, and throughout the world, feel that there is a feeling of loss. Um, and as a society, in a collective manner. However varied its appearance in the patient's life might be. Well, obviously, in all the collectives of the world, we have many different appearances of the way life ought to be. And and we hope it can be. When something essential is missing in a person's life, whether it is someone else or a purposeful path, frequently a sense of emptiness and meaninglessness can take over. Well, in World War II, the United States certainly had a purposeful path, and by the end of the 4-year war, we were building a Liberty ship every day in the United States. Can you imagine that? We're building an entire vessel uh, every day in this country, and that was happening over 70, 80 years ago. So we have that capability. Um, these impressions lead to loss of development of instinct, social connection, and decreased body consciousness, and an absence of dreams and visions. And so, isn't this is what's happening with cell phones today? I just ask you. Most people try to find all sorts of distractions as long as possible. Isn't that what is happening with cell phones, where everybody wants to be distracted? I mean, even me, I acknowledge that this morning I was screen sucked for quite a period of time, and because I was suddenly realizing that videos that I was making, I thought privately only on my cell phone, um, and not yet for publication. Um, have already been published on Instagram, on my Instagram account, which I had no idea of that. And moreover, my goofs, my mistakes, were also appearing. And so I better be careful what I video record, because it's out there. And I was very busily trying to think about the global consequences of that because I've published a lot of video over the last 20 years. Um, and so, anyway, we have to interact with one another. That's part of what the popularity of this YouTube channel is. We have to first see what it means in our own life and then go back and apply it to our own life. Um, so Richard says they all argue about biblical points to no end, yet there is only one truth. And absolutely, that's absolutely true. Um, Richard. And, the more we argue about a book that came together in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, that's when the modern Holy Bible was put together by a lot of learned men. It was only men. Um, you know, and so we as modern human beings are relying solely on that. Oh my God. Has nothing happened in that time? Um, and so Cherie says, I also took a photograph of Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, I presume. He also lived close by, and I used to spit on the sidewalk as he passed. I was a little upset then. Have mercy on me. Well, absolutely. You can people can think that way about any individual. Um, I can think of worse than spit to be um, applied to people's graves, but um, when I say that, all of a sudden there's all this imagery out there that everybody thinks, and so have mercy upon us. But how do we have to live? How do we have to live as a collective? That's the question. That is the emerging question of our time. How do we have to live as a collective? And of course, it's every collective from the family on up. But how do we have to live as a collective of the United States, as a collective of all human beings? That's an issue that is far from being resolved right now. And Richard says that Shri has certainly lived a most interesting life. Uh, and Shri says one has to evolve and grow. We all have interesting lives. Uh, I knew he was evil, yes. And, you know, the followers of um, Machiavelli, The Prince, and Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I can mention a couple of them. And those are people that are being led off the track from where we have to be as human beings in order to survive as a group. And goodness gracious, we can't be arguing about theology. Um, I keep thinking of this Methodist minister in Kentucky, I think, who his community was hit by a tornado and his church was destroyed. And some, you know, impolite, I would call him, newsman says, well, why does God do such things to good people? And uh, the pastor simply said, well, that it's not about why God sends a tornado. Um, it's about how we treat one another after the tornado has passed. And that's the point. The point is, how do we treat one another? And how do we interact with one another in the world? And, obviously there's a lot of people who think that there's some simple solution to some major problem. Uh, Obviously there's a major problem in Iran right now where people are demonstrating again, and they've had this theocratic um, government since 1979 who's done a lot of terrible things and a lot of murders. But there were lots of murders before under the previous administrations of Iran. And now I shudder to think the Iranians apparently are coalescing the opposition is now coalescing around Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the Shah of Iran. And so people want to go from this theocracy to another autocracy. Goodness gracious. I mean, how long is that going to take to work out? And how many lives? God knows. I don't know. Um, And Richard says, correct that the New Testament came together in 325, but the Old Testament goes back 6,000 years. Well, yeah, it does. You know, it, but people didn't know uh, that there was such a thing as an Old Testament for the 6,000 years. And And I think that the Jews accept mainly the Torah, which is the first five books of the Old Testament for their faith. And Richard says the Quran came after Jesus was crucified. Yeah, you think it mostly is a vision of Muhammad, peace be upon him, who lived in 640, or, who wrote the book in 640 AD, so 600 years after um, the time of Christ. And the Christian story is contained in the Quran. And so uh, that's an interesting point that uh, Muslims regard Jesus Christ as a prophet, as and regard many of the Old Testament prophets as prophets, and and so, in one sense, the Muslim world is more advanced than the Christian world because they've already accepted in the Quran um, many aspects of the Holy Bible. And, most Christians haven't even looked at the Quran. Uh, let's see. Uh, Sheree says, this week I've been listening to the Paris Center with different people, Dr. Ian McGilchrist, David Bohm, indigenous cultures even. Well, good. The more we know is the better, the better we can find ways to work together. Richard says, I pray that the Venezuela gets the help it needs and Trump just doesn't take their oil like candy from a sick baby. Well, um, I think that things are going to get a lot worse in Venezuela before they get better, unfortunately. And and I think the Venezuelans need to, you know, deal with their own house if possible. Okay, I'm gonna read on here. So acceptance. Acceptance of loss is required to get behind emotions and come into contact with inner images and voices. It is a difficult task, but through progressive translation of emotions into images and subsequent understanding of their meanings, felt tension diminishes. Jung realizes the acceptance process is crucial in order to not be torn apart by the unconscious pressure. The spirit of the depths asks Jung to climb into his depths, to sink in, to sit down and be calm. From this experience, he develops a method for coming challenges in the encounter. Let it unfold. All right. So, very much so. We get cooking on our emotions, and that allows things to evolve. And so, you know, it's very unfortunate that Miss Good was killed by this um, agent, but it probably takes her death and many others before we come to grips with the evil that is represented by this ICE thing and this $170 billion expense on ICE that was in the big beautiful bill. Can you imagine? Donald Trump has conned the Republican Party into giving him $170 billion for this organization of thugs. And I think that's probably bigger than the budget of the U.S. Marine Corps. And we at least have standards in the Marine Corps. My God. Um, yeah. And Cherie says the concept of ecological niche has gained much traction since the early 20th century, and many hundreds of plants and animal species now thoroughly analyzed and categorized under this rubric. Well, analyzation and categorization is obviously all very good because it helps us have more knowledge. And the more knowledge we have, the better off we are because we're able to develop cures to human diseases, for example, by this categorization. And yet you don't want to be sliced and diced too much. We want to pay attention to what our psyche is telling us. And let's remember that our psyche developed um, millions of years ago, not a few thousand years. I mean, if I look at the statues of Egypt, those people, the statues of Isis, pretty much look like human beings today. And, they believe different things and they came up with different ideas of how to live, but those still are human beings that we can recognize as human beings. But um, what went on before and what went on before, quote unquote, Adam and Eve? That's the question. And, um, we have biblical preachers who want to say that the world is only 6,000 years old. And we know that that's obviously not true, what they say about that. And so, we can continue to believe that God went presto changeo and there was a universe. But that we also know that that isn't the case. We now know that the Big Bang occurred about 13.8 billion years ago, and everything has come since then, and all human ideas, um, whether um, of whatever kind, um, have come since the beginning of Earth, and Earth is the only planet of any kind anywhere in the universe out of billions that has human life. And so, or any life, let alone human life. And so far, and I have a astrophysicist or astrobiologist friend who says that, her career would be made if they found one microbe of a living species that was developed outside of the earth. That would make her career. And so, you know, you just have to rethink the meaning of all these biblical ideas. I mean, I'm not saying that they're wrong. They were right for their day, but we are evolving. Um, Sure, says, we know that, like any other species, humans exist in a very narrow band with which we live and flourish with the onset of Anthropocenes, the new human era. Those specifically have increasingly come. I hit my cord, so if I'm not being heard, please let me know. Um, Yeah, and Cherie says we originated out of Africa. We are all over the place. Yep, we're all over the place, and we evolved into different races and so on. But if you take a modern human being, even from the most primitive areas of Africa, they aren't importantly different from us, except in the knowledge that we have. Um, And so, anyway, all right, reading on. So, ambiguity is the next title here. Letting unfold, quote unquote, turns out to be not as simple as it sounds, given the appearance of multiple resistances to the ego to let go. Indeed, ambiguity and relativity influence our being as layers of the psyche and function both positively and counterproductively. Jung found that understanding these phenomena is of great therapeutic value and, in fact, reflects a major component of in the activity of the compensatory function of the psyche. So, so the point is, yeah, there are major resistances. So, the people of MAGA want the country to be what they imagine it was, let's say in the 1950s, I suppose, after World War II. Um, and yet we've come way beyond that, and we have to face the fact that the world is now one species, and we have changed so much that I used to think of us all as different when I lived in Japan at the age of 15, and I felt very out of place in Japan. But later on, I lived in Japan. One of my daughters was born there, and I don't find great differences between Americans and Japanese, for example, and or any other race or species or uh, nationality. Okay. And so, there we do have resistances. Some of them have come up in the YouTube channel here, and we resist certain things, but nonetheless, the world is changing, and we better get on the train, or we're going to be left behind. Um, Archifanes asked this question: Why do our skeletal structures differ from one another? Well, I don't know. Everybody's different. All human beings are different, and when you consider uh, the number of sperm that could have impregnated the one egg from which you evolved, um, you could have been any number, millions of possible variations just of yourself within the womb of your own mother. And so it's no wonder that we're all different, but it's all at the same time, we're all the same. So, okay, Zootis says, what was Jung's opinion of Africans? And I think that by and large, he didn't have much of an opinion about Africans, except to the extent that they were something that he could study, but he was fairly ignorant, both of Africa and about India, honestly. Um, Jung went to India for 6 weeks or 3 months one time. He spent 3 months in India one time in 1937, and he was sick for about half the time. Um, and so let's say it was about 6 weeks when he was physically able to do anything besides his dysentery. And, that's not much time to understand India. I've been to India 44 times, believe it or not. I've actually traveled physically to India 44 times since 1990. Um, and uh, I'm not even close to understanding India, nowhere near it. So there's no chance that Jung could have understood either Africa or India. Uh, he does certainly understand the classics and Greek and Roman psychology and a lot about Egyptian um, civilization and psychology. Sure, he knows those things. Um, and he was the son of a pastor after all, and he came from a time when we educated differently and from the liberal arts um, approach. And so, he knew a lot. He was a very educated man, but I wouldn't hang my hat on anything he said about uh, India and Africa, other than okay, this is what he saw and this was his interpretation of it. But good grief, no. um, I love Carl Jung, but we have to understand who the man was. Um, So Richard says biblical theme is to act like God's children and not like animals. We have emotions that animals do not, but the mothering instinct and protection of our young is instinctual. Well, okay, I don't know what the point of that is. Um, yeah, I mean, the teaching of the church is to act act like um, reasonable human beings. And this is Jesus's teaching as well as pretty much every religion. Um, and so, okay, I'm not going to get into the weeds of our biology here because this is a Jungian event. Uh, Jung might have liked Trump. Yeah, he might have. I acknowledge that. Um, and and Sharice, and thanks for fair answers, says Zudi. So I appreciate your acknowledging that. Shuri says a spread from Africa about 100,000 years ago, living and traveling in small groups. These uh, anto Adam uh, modern human beings were hunter gatherers. Yeah, okay, they spread from Africa, and we really don't know too much about what they were doing before 8,000 years ago. I mean, the early civilizations that we have access to today were about 8,000 years ago. So uh, God knows what happened before that. Uh, okay, Archifaunus, I'm not going to get into all those things that you mentioned. And Zuti's asks, have you read into 16 personalities of the MBTI and socionics? I don't know what socionics is, but I certainly have been reading about the MBTI for over 35 years now. Okay. As regular followers of this channel would know. And so that's why I'm not getting into it, not because it isn't important. It is important, but it's actually basic and we've been creating videos about these things for the last decade now. It's 10 years since I started doing this YouTube channel, and there are uh, tens of thousands. Well, there's actually uh, almost 2,000 videos here. So, Zuta 7 is going to have to go back and look at some of the old videos, I think. Um, Tree says, I want to understand why or what is behind the Big Bang. Fair enough, and dark holes and dark matters. Yeah, good Lord. There's so much out there and we know almost nothing. Uh, okay, check out Jim Cleveland. All right. In terms of an artist to look at, I will look at Jim Cleveland if assuming I can get a chance here. Uh, what I am going to do though is also um, going to start doing more on Instagram or through my video recording from my cell phone because now knowing that it gets posted on Instagram immediately, good Lord, that can mean a lot to this YouTube channel. And so anyway, okay, John Dunsworth, Family Channel, the Narayana of Jung, in my humble opinion. Okay, I don't know anything about what that is. So, all right, ambiguity. I guess I read this, but I'm going to read it again. Letting unfold, quote unquote, turns out to be not as simple as it sounds, given the appearance of multiple resistances of the ego to let go. Indeed, ambiguity and relativity influence our being as layers of the psyche and function both positively and counterproductively. Jung found that understanding these phenomena is of great therapeutic value and, in fact, reflects a major component in the activity of the compensatory function of the psyche. Very important idea. Okay, then the next subtitle here is Mysterium. Okay. Um, Mysterium, importance of learning to love the soul. Okay, now as I read this, and I've not read this recently at least, um, let us start to think about, let's get away from individual soul and start looking at the collective soul, because that, it seems to me, is where we can advance Jungian psychology. Jung identified the collective unconscious 110 years ago and correctly identified it, and we can see it um, in everything. I mean, Michelle Reynolds, who was had the dream last week about the attack on Venezuela, just proves that Jung was right. Um, and so, as we read this about the soul, let us try to understand what is the soul of our collective, whatever it is, from the family. What's the soul of your family? What is the soul of your state, your city, um, any group that you are a member of, up to and including your nation state, the country in which you live? What is the soul? And then what is the soul of the human species in general? Um, and okay, Sherry, I'm going to leave the comment about Van Gogh for the moment. Okay, so Mysterium, importance of learning to love the soul. In the ongoing inner adventure, Jung encounters Elijah and Salome, who evolve, change, and deepen in relation to the degree with which he speaks and relates with them. Salome, the dancer, incorporates a feeling and receiving element, which later becomes the discovery of the anima. An autonomous animating function of the psyche, she is fundamentally ambivalent according to what attitude the ego has toward her and whether she is being heard. Elijah represents a thinking aspect but transforms into the figure of Philemon, an inner guide embodying superior intelligence and wisdom. He initiates Jung in the objectivity of the soul in the sense that they and other contents demonstrate truthfulness within the psyche. Elijah mentors him to see the inner figures with the eyes of the soul, meaning to get involved with her world and not to confuse these experiences as only products of an overwrought sensibility, which would just open the gates to madness. They are opposites. Salome and Elijah awaken the idea to not only receive the images of the soul rationally, but also with felt engagement. They arise or flow out from the unconscious and its all pervading creative power, or in psychological terms, self generating instinct that neither knows nor processes itself, comparable to Schopenhauer's universal will. The flowing out means a realization of the unconscious content and the unconscious dynamis in the form of an idea born in the soul. This is an act of conscious differentiation from unconscious dynamis. You cannot learn this. It can only develop in you. You cannot will this. It takes the will from your hand and wills itself. Will yourself. That leads to the way. Jung's consideration for the inner inhabitants as real entities because he realizes how effectual they are, and that there is no influencing transformation between the I and the masculine and feminine figures, as well as among the figures themselves. So, so what we need to do now is start to realize what is manifesting, not from our own unconscious, but from the unconscious of the collective. What is the soul of the collective? Where is it taking us? Will we see it in our lifetime? Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, there have been a lot of people that have died over fighting over stuff. And one of the things that you'll see on Instagram is that I've been reading the narrative of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, and as I'm reading it, I'm realizing how much we have changed or how little we have changed. And so the only thing we can really change is ourselves. We have 330 million Americans right now. So, what's one psyche up against that? We can observe it, but the only thing we can change is to change ourselves. And I'm appalled at how long it has taken the United States to change to accept Black people as part of the country and just ignore race in this country. Um, I do acknowledge, for example, I do acknowledge that um, up until about the time I was 40, uh, I would be always conscious that I was talking to someone of a different race. But after 40, because of all the work I did in India and Japan, and then later in education, uh, I never think about it anymore. It just does not come to mind. And uh, as most of you know, I have one family among my daughters who is biracial. They're Korean Americans, and it's because their father was born in Korea. He came to the United States when he was 4 years old, but um, he's quite American now. And if you spoke to him on the telephone, you would not know that he was a Korean American. And that's definitely true of my grandchildren. Um, and but it's very true of my son-in-law as well. And they're people. They're just people. And um, and so we need to step back and understand what is the soul of the collective. And unfortunately, I still have children in my school where I'm now teaching who are have asked me, did I ever own slaves? They've conflated it so much in their own minds as they're coming up as newly established human beings. They don't have the concept yet of 160 years has passed since slavery was abolished. Well, yeah, it's been abolished, but it's not abolished uh, for them, not until they learn. So, okay, I'm just looking at my watch, which contains distressing new news, but I'm going to go on. Okay, seeking one's devil, access of life. This is the subtitle. Seeking one's devil, access to life. Jung has to accept that the devil as adversary is his own other standpoint and magnifies the bridging capacities. In their challenging dialogue, Jung learns it is even necessary to seek the opposite in oneself, to actively turn toward these dimensions and to respect them. The acceptance of the other within, including the contrasexual, allows one to become more responsible for one's desire and to behave toward the other with integrity. The masculine and the feminine are bound up with evil, meaning that several layers of gender energies are still undifferentiated within complexes of the unconscious. Therefore, people hate to accept their own other because it is exceedingly unpleasant to own gloomy aspects as destructive felt contents. They are mostly projected outside and then create all kinds of conflicts. In the end, it depends on us whether desire ruins or saves us. These insights are very helpful in therapy for individuals and couples. Becoming conscious about reciprocal projections paralyzing a couple's eros can have deep impacts on the health of families as well as their connections within society. Essentially, the encounter with the devil is the confrontation with everything that provokes negative emotions and represents the mystery of the other, which ultimately yields access to inner and outer life. It is impossible to imagine fully to what extent the other is opposed to the I, since it is opposed not according to the laws of reason, but thoroughly and according to its own nature, which is part of the mystery of life. Okay. Um, let me, I just want to see how much farther we have to go here. It seems clear that I'm not going to get through this whole essay today. Holy smokes. I'm not going to get through this essay this month. This person wrote a very long, comprehensive essay, which has lots of valuable things. Um, okay, facing one's own devil. So, whatever you think is right, is good, is wonderful in the country, whoever you are, whatever you think, um, you have an opposite within you. This is the way psychic energy works. The opposites are two poles of whatever issue is present. And we all live on this continuum of these two poles. We see it in the MBTI, of course, with introvert, extrovert. These are big gargantuan opposites like man and woman or masculine and feminine. Those things, those are gargantuan opposites. But our body doesn't do anything without having opposites. For example, our body um, regenerates itself every 7 years. Every cell in your body, with the exception possibly of bone matter and brain matter, um, regenerates every 7 years. And so there are parts of you that are going through your veins that are deciding what, through your blood that is deciding, okay, this cell needs regeneration now, or it doesn't need regeneration. And either yes or no, it's a yes or no question. So those are opposites. And so with respect to every cell in your body, that decision is being made constantly. Okay, so if that's true, then every decision all the way up from the unconscious is also having to be made. And so you have to accept that all these bigger concepts, these bigger issues have their opposite. And so if you bring these unconscious devils into consciousness, then at least you know about them. And once you know about them, then you can accept them or not accept them. Um, okay, now yeah, there's a long discussion about Van Gogh here, which I guess I'm just not going to get into it because it's too long, and it's nice that you folks are having this conversation about Van Gogh and Rembrandt, who are two of my favorite people. uh, and they're two of my favorite people, but this uh, YouTube channel is not about art per se. It's about the unconscious per se. So I'm not going to get into the discussion um, about that. Okay, so seeking one's devil access to life. Did I just read this? Okay. If I okay. I'm going to read this chapter. I'm sorry, I've gotten so confused by things right now that I don't remember whether I just read this paragraph or this subtitle, but I'm going to read it again because it's important. And please do pay as much attention as possible to it. Um, Jung has to accept, okay, this is seeking one's devil access to life. Jung has to accept that that the devil as adversary is his own other standpoint and magnifies the bridging capacities. In their challenging dialogue, Jung learns that it is even necessary to seek the opposite in oneself, to actively turn toward these dimensions and to respect them. The acceptance of the other within, including the contrasexual, allows one to become more responsible for one's desire and to behave toward the other with integrity. The masculine and the feminine are bound up with evil, meaning that several layers of gender energies are still undifferentiated within complexes and the unconscious. Therefore, people hate to accept their own other because it is exceedingly unpleasant to own gloomy aspects as destructive felt contents. They are mostly projected outside and then create all kinds of conflicts. In the end, it depends on us whether desire ruins or saves us. These insights are very helpful in therapy for individuals and couples. Becoming conscious about reciprocal projections paralyzing a couple's eros can have deep impact on the health of families, as well as their connections within society. Essentially, the encounter with the devil is the confrontation with everything that provokes negative emotions and represents the mystery of the other, which ultimately yields access to inner and outer life. It is impossible to imagine fully to what extent the other is opposed to the I, since it is opposed not according to the laws of reason, but thoroughly and accordingly to its own nature, which is part of the mystery of life. Okay, so whatever you think is awful, terrible in the world, that's part of you. Okay, sorry, that's the way it is. That's part of you. And so you need to find a way to accept the part of you that you hate. And so, I recall on this YouTube channel that I was having a conversation with a woman one time, and she was talking about the the patriarchy and how men of a certain ilk really bothered her. And I said, well, wait a minute. Those are the men that kept me alive in Vietnam. I can't criticize those men for being men. Um, and you know, and so there's just um, you can go into this ad infinitum, but we have to accept it all. We have to accept everything. We have to accept also the hated ICE agent that murdered Miss Love or Miss Good. Um, he is a part of us, and we need to accept that. I'm sorry, I'm changing the power onto my mouse so that I can recharge it. But anyway, that's the kind of thing we can't, uh, you know, he's part of our being American. Okay. That agent is part of us as a collective, as a part of the American collective. And, we have to find the ways to, if that's not a part of what we want the country to be, then we have to find ways that we can change that. And the first way that we can change it immediately is by changing ourselves. So Jerry says, I support our veterans, but some didn't understand everything at the time, whether it was World War One or two, or these ongoing wars of today. Well, yeah, I mean, when I was in Vietnam, for example, I didn't know that the war was really against the Soviet Union. Okay, I thought I was fighting North Vietnamese army or the Viet Cong, but I never thought of it, never crossed my mind that it was the Soviet Union. And it wasn't until 30 years later, 30 years after the event of my being in Vietnam, that I started to hear these revisionist ideas that it was a it was a skirmish in the Cold War. It was a hot skirmish in the Cold War, and that it ran Russia out of money, or the Soviet Union out of money, to the point where the Soviet Union collapsed, and Ukraine could differentiate itself from the USSR again, for example. So we have to understand that things that we hate sometimes um, are actually work out positively. And we just, I mean, this is sort of the message of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's the message of the eternal moment, which is that, you have to live each day, each moment as the eternal moment, and always pick from the best of the possibilities that you're faced with. And I did I did find where I have this uh, on my Mac again, so maybe I can pull that up. Because I gave this, I really have loved this quote from Jung, uh, for a long, long while. Oh boy, I just have too many files on this. Oops. Okay. Oop. I don't know about that. All right, this will work. I've written this in calligraphy multiple times as a way to work up my calligraphy. So I'm going to share it with you here. This is not the best version that I ever created of it, but you can at least um, get the words. So here it comes. Okay, the eternal moment. I'll read it for you in case you cannot read it. The great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment, and that means this moment right now. And if you do not realize it, you have missed the best part of life. You have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of a life contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this moment. One should take each moment as the eternal moment. as if nothing were ever going to change, not anticipating a faraway future. For the future always grows out of that which is, and it cannot be sound if it grows in a morbid soil. If we are morbid and don't feel this here and now, then we naturally will build up a sickly future. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. C.G. Jung. Okay, so I edited out the sentence about morbidity because I wasn't sure I knew what it meant. But the point is that this is, in essence, the same advice that's contained also in the Bhagavad Gita, and it's also contained in the Heart Sutra of Buddhism. And so I finally put this together a couple of weeks back, and and so it's an important thing to think about because we can't, let's face it, any one of us, I mean, even if we became a U.S. senator or a congressman or even president of the United States, we couldn't change a lot of things. Okay, even Donald Trump is finding his own limitations step by step. And so we can change ourselves, and we change ourselves by in every moment choosing the best of the possibilities by analyzing them. And that best of the possibilities is actually the culmination of billions of thoughts only within your body, as I talked about it, with every cell in your body, and there are trillions of them. Um, there's a decision being made every day about whether that cell is going to live or die and be reborn through the processes of your physical existence. So therefore, through our consciousness, the the pièce de la résistance of our existence is our consciousness. Through our consciousness, it's our consciousness that has to make these decisions, and it's the consciousness of all Americans who will decide what our future will be in this country. Now, I'm very positive about that future, but um, I don't know what crazy things our our current president may do. I mean, there are certain aspects of the Venezuela uh, attack which I approve of. Um, Certainly, I approve of enforcing our laws. Um, I don't know that it was necessary to use 150 airplanes and thousands of troops to do what we did so far. But but I have to say that I think so far the results are positive. But it doesn't mean that our president, who I don't think is a mature or is of mature mind, let alone conscious, it can make decisions of that magnitude um, successfully all the time, let's say. Um, yeah, as Richard says, creation comes out of decay eventually. Uh, And Archifanes refers back to an image that was a very powerful image where the heart of a girl has a serpent in it. And yeah, we are all evil. If we had been in Maduro's place and what Maduro got to do over the last decade or so, um, would we have made the same decisions? I don't know. Maybe it's possible. Um, right. And I obviously I can't like the decision of the ICE officer who murdered this woman. I consider what he did was murder. But I do think that what goes around comes around, and um, what he did will ultimately cost him enough to be quite painful. And even if he's never prosecuted under the law per se, he can never, in his whole life, he can never forget what he did. And uh, my guess is that among the last conscious thoughts that that man ever has will be the conscious thought that he murdered that woman and she didn't deserve it. Um, So Richard says, I think we all know, the entire world knows our president's personality, and the world knows it, and not only knows it, but um, will respond to it um, in the same way with the psychic energy that all of us may respond to things. And so, we see the box score, like a baseball game. We see the box score every day on our television sets when there's this poll or that poll that says whether he's advancing or not advancing, but uh, receding in the human psyche. But we only get to make the decision, choose the best of our possibilities every 4 years. But meanwhile, we can change the trajectory of that when we make our biannual decision about Congress. So um, that's choosing from the best of the possibilities. And we can hope that some crazy person won't kill us all by detonating a nuclear weapon or something like that. We have to hope for that. But nonetheless, we have to acknowledge that it's a possibility, and it's our country that developed that. Uh, I think you're talking about stuff that I don't recall. So I think this is well enough understood, and we have come full fully on this essay. The next topic that we are covering, which will be next week, is Is-Debar the psychological God? And of all the parts of the Red Book, I think that the Is-Debar section of the Red Book is one of the most interesting and the most important. We may tarry on that. But the discussion in the Black books is even more powerful than in the Red Book. So I urge you, if you haven't looked at it in the Red Book, to look up the section on Is-Debar and start to read that. Okay. All right, folks. So next week we will continue with let's see, Dr. Heider's essay entitled "The Burning Urgency of Psychodynamic Discoveries in the Red Book for Psychiatry and Psychotherapy: A Key to Healing Resonance of Soul, Love, and Life." And we're working with this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. And we're working with volume 4 of this series. There are 5 volumes in total. And I would urge you all to take a look at my Instagram account. I don't hide it. It's under Skip_Conover. I think that's my handle on Instagram. And I'm currently reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. It's worth your time. It will probably take me until April to read it because I only get about 20 minutes a day at school in which I can read in this. So I am trying to read the whole book, and hopefully we'll finish it before the end of this academic year. But in any case, as I read these sections day by day, they will appear on my Instagram account. So thank you for being here. Peace, and let's all stay alive. That's all I can say. So peace to everyone. I'm going to sign off for now.